you. Thank you for welcoming me to this event. For me, it's a real challenge to try to depict what has evolved in the realm of architecture. The first question is as such, how can I, as a practicing architect, how could I be able to transmit to you, non-architects, the core of my work, which evolves between the practice and the research. Practice, which is the act of building, or what could actually refer to the question, what? And research, the act of thinking, which could actually respond to the question, how? As to the where, that I don't know, because basically I don't pick the sites where my clients want me to build. So, to wrap it up, to be extremely short, I would ask the following questions. On the subject of evolving patterns, would history be able to point out some benchmark to ascertain incredible significant evolutions? Probably. Should we start with the domain or the habitat of Adam and Eve in the Garden Eden? Not really. No one has never seen it. Should I point out the pyramids, the antique temples, the Roman and Gothic cathedrals? Yes, it could be a start. But moreover, what becomes incredibly important is the kind of technical and scientific revolution that we should take on account. And for this, which century are we talking about in order to depict exactly what the revolution should be about? In the 21st century, we are in a very weird epoch, a time where the computers have helped us to design basically anything we want, sometimes much better than reality. With the coming of AI, which still in our domain kind of balbuciating, it kind of ascertains the presence of certain things, of certain shapes and forms that are incredibly exciting, but still ask questions as for the use of them. In the domain of climate awareness, we have many concerns that are brought to life through the lenses of sustainability, of course, low carbon issues, and the preservation of species. Medical and scientific progress have helped us to get older in better conditions. We eat better, we hope to breathe better. And scientific research has helped us to manufacture new materials for buildings, thinner, less costly, low carbon, more aware of the environment, and of course respectful of the ecology. But all of these patterns should help the architects to think, design and build with an undisputed awareness of making a better world, a better place for the expected 9.7 billion people in 2050. Then the real question for me is, of course, how are we going to do that? How will all this apparatus of novelties contribute to better dwellings, safer streets, more agreeable cities, better parks and gardens, better spaces so that humans can share with what should remain a treasure, what I would call the live together, or better yet, some sort of a unified space that enhances people to share ground and sky freely and collectively. For this, we need a solid core of new ideas, of course, and to come to safeguard some sort of an optimistic vision. I shall start the presentation with an old, well-known Jewish joke. A married couple is having problems with their child. The problem is very simple. At the age of 3 years old, the child has never talked. He has never uttered a word. The parents are kind of bewildered, but they surrender to the sad fact after going to psychologists, speech therapists, and so forth and so on. The kid will never talk. One evening at the dinner table, about 10 years, the kid is about between 10 and 11 years old, the kid looks at his mom and says in a very clear voice, "Excuse me, Mom, can you pass me the salt, please?" The mother is totally beside herself, and she almost falls from her chair, and she says, "But Moshe, you talk. How can this happen? What has happened? What?" She's totally speechless. In a very poised, calm voice, the kid says, "Well, Mom, up until today, everything was just perfect." So, we can conclude this story and try to look at significance and explanations and so forth. But let's be simple here. First, the salt. Since the kid's first words are about bringing some taste to his food, we could say, obviously, that the salt brings flavor into what happens or appears to be an incredible tranquil life, but a life of silence. David Byrne, who is the singer of the rock group The Talking Heads, actually had a song which was called, I forgot the title, but said, "Heaven is the place where nothing ever happens." But let's push it further. Moshe, the kid, by talking, breaks the habit of a certain peace, right? He operates some sort of a disruption, a break into a silence of some impeccable, dull perfection. So speech here is a necessary unrest. It brings turmoil in the quiet world. So words, in our very case, are somewhat of a disconnection. Words sever something. Let's a little bit recall that in Hebrew, the word word translates as milah. But milah also means cut. And if we go a little bit further also, milah means alliance. So we kind of, balance ourselves between cut and alliance. In that very case, Moshe the kid severs the silence and symmetrically reunites with his parents, right? By cutting the closure of perfection, Moshe invents the family. He and his parents reassemble, reunite in a relationship. By cutting the closure of perfection, Moshe invents the family and will hope that everything will be better after that. Before talking, Moshe was just left alone. He was the other one. Now by talking, he becomes the one other, the significant one, or the significant other. So what's the relationship with architecture with all of that? And chiefly with the theme of evolving patterns, and especially in the purpose of this talk. What are the very important discoveries that have broken the installed, comfortable set of history? Let's look at that a little bit. Let's turn our head a little backwards, and let's meet these three gentlemen. Le Corbusier, French architect, Albert Einstein, the scientist, and next to them, Frank Lloyd Wright, here that you see presenting the model of the well-known Guggenheim building. What are they doing in real life? What is their theory and their practice? Le Corbusier invents in 1920 something which is called the 5 points of architecture. The 5 points of architecture, to make a very long story shorter, resumes itself as being free facade, free plan, and so forth and so on. We can actually spell it out. But the kind of interesting invention is that before houses were built with walls. Now the walls totally dissolve and they are built with columns so that the walls and the space could be totally free. Here is an example of a building that actually pursues this theory. It's a building in Ahmedabad in India, where you have these kind of sunbreakers all in concrete. And once you pass the sunbreaker in the plan, you see these rounded forms, shapes, totally freely exploded in space. Resembles a little bit like a painting. Resembles a little bit like probably nothing we've ever seen before. And the mic working? Yes. But it's the application of this kind of theory of freedom of structure and freedom of space. Inside the building, these shapes, which have functions, again, float freely in some sort of an interior, which at the same time has no glazing surfaces because of climate. So it's some kind of an interior which is interior, exterior. It's a precise imprecision. So, sorry, here we go again. Okay. In the meantime, of course, Einstein invents something which we know. And in a letter in 1939 to Roosevelt, Albert Einstein says, this new phenomenon would also lead to the construction of bombs. He discovers the relativity in 1905, where mass and energy could be totally interchangeable. And after that, let's continue a little bit with Frank Lloyd Wright, with some sort of an invention that he made, which is called the Usonian house. Usonian house, U.S., USA, but also us, the American house for all of us. But the kind of typical invention that it makes is that, again, when we look at the plan of houses, of Frank Lloyd Wright houses, the space is not strictly between walls. It kind of implodes inside the plan. I would like to quote a friend of mine, Jonathan Friedman, who actually wrote an article about 30 years ago, which is called "Wright Explodes the Box." He says, I quote, "Frank Lloyd Wright's birthday is usually given as 1867, the year Alfred Nobel invented dynamite, Siemens perfected the dynamo, and Monnier invented reinforced concrete, which is an explosion of steel in cement." The Frank Lloyd Wright houses give us the kind of vision into this spatial implosion, so that the kitchen, which was sometimes relinquished being at the corner of the house, remains in some sort of a central space. And with a play on word that Jonathan Friedman brings in his article, he makes the parallel between the word heart and the word hearth. In the Frank Lloyd Wright houses, the hearth, the foyer, is hollow. We all know that our heart is as well hollow. It's a hollow muscle. So we kind of embark into something where spatial inventions are trying to free themselves from, I would say, previous endeavors, try to invent something else, technologically speaking, spatially speaking, probably ecologically speaking, even though the term in those years was not really in fashion. And with this kind of explosion, I would venture to say that there is some sort of a tie, of a link between what we talked about. First of all, explosion is not here some sort of a literal terms, but it has to be taken or envisioned as a possible outburst from old schemes, an outbreak towards future, and yet an incredible discovery, because it's a blow-up of discoveries and possibilities. These three topics, Corbusier, Einstein, Frank Lloyd Wright, relate to Moshe, the kid. How? Because the one, by talking, gives us the blast of words into the silence of this kind of perfect world, a world with no relationship. So how can we apply and look at the world which is now producing some kind of, we'll say, strange things? This is the latest one in Manhattan. It's a skyscraper. It's called, it's not called anything, it's seasonally, of course, the Steinway Tower, designed by shop architects. And it's totally solitary. It's 18 meter wide, 435 meter high, 80 stories, and it is today the thinnest tower in the world. The proportion of the building is 24 times its base. 24, why 24? 24 hours, the cycle of the day. 24 is also the number of books in the Bible. 24, let's leave it at that. I don't think it's a deliberate act to have the number 24. But anyhow, one of the ideas of this thing is to have one apartment per floor. And there's another one that actually is kind of, finding itself into the latest ones. This one is called Big Bend. And it's in fact totally thinner. So lucky for you if you inhabit the last floor. But the kind of incredible thing that dawned on me into these examples is, why are we going into this world of the incredible shrinking man? Are buildings on a diet? Why are we going into this thing of spatial anorexia? But if we recall a little bit what Frank Lloyd Wright did in Buffalo in 1904, was a building with an incredible body of void, a space totally sculpted inside. We could also remind us of the John Portman's hotels in San Francisco or in Atlanta, where the space, the void, is absolutely optimistic, big for everyone, and has totally nothing to see with this shrinking stuff. And so that the French-Peruvian architect Henri Siriani, in his book Vivre Haut, also depicts and projects this kind of phantasmatic world that actually are about voids that are captured into the vertical space. It's not the first time that we have incredible spatial invention, the Mezquita in Spain also, which actually is a mosque into which they inserted a cathedral. In the Forest of Columns, you have incredible light in the center. In also several projects throughout the world, we're having this type of exterior, interior body of sculpted void space that have like in World and Seven, a building by Ricardo Bofill, this idea of reuniting all humans in voids where the vis-a-vis makes or aims at making light and life better for everyone. And in the Lima university built by Grafton Architects, two architects from Dublin, you have also this incredible, like in Toulouse, this incredible inside-outside space, which I would venture to say is built for humans in democracy, where everyone can actually find the void space that he or she needs in a very optimistic way, and not, I go back to anorexia, in this idea of thinning stuff. So, since the purpose of this talk was about invention and novelty, I would venture to say that, of course, invention cannot separate itself from novelty. But, like Coco Chanel says, you're new on a Monday, and on a Wednesday, you're old. Give it Tuesday, and we'll see what happens. Invention itself aims at being totally intemporal. Of course, I don't want to sound totally passéist by saying, hey, it was better in the 20s. No. But at the same time, for the life of me, I don't know since the 1920s what are or what is the incredible scientific evolution that made space allow in an explosion of optimistic features. So nostalgia, not my business. However, this idea of collective and generous space, yes, very important. Very important because we have to break from this habit of the culture of the self, of being totally lost in space, in weightlessness, completely alone. And in the words of Duke Ellington, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing, even though we attribute this saying to Fats Waller. No, it's from Duke Ellington, where actually both of the members of the band at the unison make this incredible implosion slash explosion of space. So the optimistic idea and the chance that we have is to make these spaces again for everyone, to reassemble some sort of inside slash outside explosion of meaning and relationships. It's not the first time things have been built in that way. And just because I have talked about the others, I would like to venture a couple of images to conclude of the work that we have done. First of all, the renovation of the Wall of Name courtyard in Paris, a cultural center in Boulogne, a school in Brittany, and probably this last image that I would leave you with, it's a little school outskirts of Paris, where the vertical slit into the concrete wall is a total mistake. We had to cut the concrete because, you know, the contractor made a mistake. But here you have the two kids that are actually from this, you know, courtyard, are trying to look at the world outside, and by the reflection of the glazed panel, offer you a certain message of infinity. I would thank you.